Hello, everyone. Welcome to Authenticity with Alicia, the podcast where we explore burnout, the pressures of society, and our quest for identity and authenticity. I'm Alicia, and today we're joined by one of my friends, Megan Secrest, who's a licensed clinical social worker based out in Oklahoma, and she also practices virtually in Vermont. So we're just geeking out of how excited I am. So thank you, Megan, for joining me today.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh,
And
yay.
a little nervous, but mostly excited.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
All the
Uh-huh.
feelings are valid for
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
I remember
absolutely.
like doing the podcast and I'm like, I love talking. And I'm also
Mhm.
like, this is weird. It's different. And that's okay that it's a little different.
Yeah, it's like kind of like a radio interview. Like if I've never done one before, but that's how I would imagine it feeling like.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, all the
Yeah.
feelings are valid here. So
Yeah.
you run your own practice. You've been
Uh-huh.
practicing for, quite some time, over 10
Yeah.
years, and then you run
Hmm.
your own private practice. And
Hmm.
can you share what the name of that is? Because I think it is such like a cool, unique name.
Thank you. Yeah, my practice is called Gift of Grit Counseling.
Yeah.
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 So,
So for those who, I'm like, what does grit mean to you?
yeah. Well, okay, so I was thinking about that the other day because I don't know. My brain went to when I first heard the term grit, I was a child, right? Like my parents are my dad is a huge Western aficionado. So like I've seen every Western film in the history of forever.
I love
But
it.
the film True Grit with John Wayne is,
Yes.
yeah, like the first time I'd heard the word, right? And then when I was trying to come up with a practice name, I was like, oh, I could use my own name, but what if I want to do a group practice? What if I
Mm-hmm.
decide to add people? I'd like something that's represents me. And I came across the term grit again, and then I was like, oh, I love alliteration. Like I love a good like alliteration moment. And so I was like, oh, gift of. Like for me, grit is resilience, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
perseverance in like insurmountable odds.
Mm-hmm.
It's continuing towards a goal. It's being persistent, and a lot of actually I shouldn't even say a lot, all of my clients have grit, right? And they would not tell you that when they come in day one. They would not tell you it's a gift either.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how it came about. And then I found out there's a ton of research on it. Angela Duckworth is a psychologist who like studies the personality type of grit,
That
like
is
that
so
particular
cool.
trait. Yeah, she's pretty cool. She has a book about grit and about essentially how people who are gritty are more successful than people
Oh,
who are just talented.
yeah.
So I don't know, but she's an interesting resource for people when they're like, okay, why that term? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, there's cool research behind it actually too. So
Oh, I
yeah,
love that.
yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, so I feel like a lot of like these words like I've heard of before, but then it's like, what does it truly mean? And so like as I've seen your practice and known you, I'm like, I've heard of grit,
Hmm.
but I don't like really know what it means. And I think like my brain always just associated grit with like the Oklahoma Southern values of like you just pick yourself up by the bootstraps and you get going. And I was
Hmm.
like, I know Megan. She's not like that type of person. Like, yes, we
Yeah.
want to keep going. That's the
Hmm.
resiliency piece. But I'm like, I think I'm missing something here. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, Megan's a very compassionate, empowering, trauma
Yeah.
informed.
Yeah.
Emotions have a space here. And so
Yes.
I like had to Google the definition. I'm like, oh, this is a lot more like positive than my brain was making this assumption about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually like that you brought up the kind of Okie standard, right? That like we do. I was listening to, or not listening to, I was looking at Sharon Says So's stories this morning. 'Cause she's like a government teacher who now teaches like politics and all sorts of stuff to adults, right? Which is cool. But she was talking about like how we as a culture in different parts of the US developed these kind of personality traits. And she was like, you have to think about like the types of people that went to the frontier were probably loners and
Mhm.
probably very self-sufficient. And so like in Oklahoma, we see a lot of that still.
Mhm.
I think it keeps people from coming to therapy, quite honestly,
Yeah.
still in our state. But like in other parts of the country, there's more of a value of maybe showing up for each other, creating a village, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. She referenced the Northeast when she was talking about that,
Mm.
and that makes sense. Like Puritan values and like being a culture.
Right. Well, they're all just like grouped together. Whereas I'm thinking of
Yeah,
Oklahoma, we have farmlands, we
they're
have
spread
plains,
out.
we have people
Hmm.
in rural communities. And so,
Yeah.
and I think even like, okay, even if it's the pick yourself up by the bootstraps type mentality, that's not all bad. There's positive characteristics of that. I think it's just when we get to these extremes, like you said, okay, it's preventing me from getting maybe additional services or acting
Hmm.
like showing that I need help. We feel like we're weak if we, need some extra support. That's where those things can get bad, or maybe not bad.
Yeah.
I don't like using those words, but just not always helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it gets out of the spectrum of like healthy, and like I always tell clients like healthy is really kind of like the middle way, right? We're aiming for like living life in the gray. It's not black or white thinking. It's like, well, okay, is there a gray type of thought we could have about this situation?
Yes.
Yeah, so grit, I mean, and I think about grit in terms of, I even wore my pearls today because I was like, that's like a representation of grit, right? Like literally, that's how pearls are created, right? Piece of grit gets into
Oh,
an oyster, it creates, essentially, it's irritated by this piece of grit, and it creates a pearl as
yeah.
a result of that. And I was like, a lot of my clients come to me and are like, this terrible thing is happening in my
Mhm.
life. And I'm like, yep, yep. If you live long enough, you're going to have terrible things happen. That is
Mhm.
like part of life,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And they look back, year, 2 years, 3 years into therapy, and they go, oh, I see the pearl now. Like I see where it
Hmm.
turned into something healthy or helpful, or changed my life in a good way.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
like that. And yeah, so spot on, right? I'm like,
Mhm.
well, more people are not trained in therapy trauma. And I'm like, this is ridiculous because we know, like, just from reported traumas that it's
Mhm.
like a ridiculous amount of folks. And that's not even unreported. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you live life, you're going to experience some pressure, some stress, some trauma. But
Yeah.
there can be pearls made in there.
Hmm. Yeah. At the very least, resiliency cultivated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And even like knowing you and just like your website, resiliency doesn't mean we need to find silver linings or be positive about it. It's like, no, this is gonna suck. Resiliency is
Mhm.
exhausting sometimes. Like
Yes.
it's okay
Yeah.
to be annoyed and frustrated.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
we kind of like only way through it is through it.
Yep. Yeah, I was thinking, you posted that the other day, like the power of the and, right? And I always forget that, even though I probably use it a lot in therapy, but like it can be both. Like
Mhm.
both things, two things can be true at once, right? Like I can hate the fact that I'm going through this thing and also recognize that it may bring value to my life
Mhm.
someday when I look back
Exactly.
on it.
Yep.
Hmm. Yeah.
Power of and works for my brain. I'm a very logical person. I'm
Yeah.
not an emotion-y person. So I'm like,
Yeah.
my brain's like, okay,
Yeah.
I can deal with this.
Yes. Yeah. It's reassuring, isn't it? Like, oh, there's an and there. It's okay.
Like, okay, that's
Yeah.
how I find the gray.
Yeah.
One of the things I know you work a lot with folks
Mhm.
is guilt and shame in the
Mhm.
therapy setting. And so, how does that show up? Like, do people come to you like, I've been feeling a lot of guilt and shame, or do you use your therapy, powers and it's like, oh, we found the nugget here?
Yeah. I think it's a mixture. I have a lot of religious clients. So some of that, I think guilt brings them in the door, right? Like I've done things that I feel like aren't who I want to be as a person. But
Yeah.
a lot of times I think people come in because their symptoms are unbearable for
Mm,
whatever reason, right? Like they're like, I'm anxious all the time, or I feel like I can't sleep, or the stuff that brings them in the door.
yeah.
And then as we get to working on it, we start exploring like, okay, so you're experiencing this terrible event, this terrible symptom, whatever.
Mhm.
What does it say about you as a person? Like using that
Mhm.
question from EMDR, right? Like,
Mhm.
what does that say about you as a person that this thing happened?
Yeah.
And clients will give you I am statements that are very powerful, and you can
Mhm.
see how that shaped the course of their life, right?
Yeah.
So I do distinguish for clients between guilt and shame because they are
Mm.
two different
Mhm.
feelings. And a lot of clients will confuse the two.
Mhm.
Guilt is I did something wrong, right? I made a mistake. And it's almost always I did something that's opposite of my values or opposite of my moral code,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Versus like shame is I am something wrong.
Yeah.
I am bad.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of clients think they're experiencing guilt, but what they're actually experiencing is shame.
Yeah.
Um, And guilt's helpful, right? Guilt points us to like, oh yeah, that's probably outside of like who I want to be as a person. That's not
Yeah.
values based for me.
Mhm.
Shame keeps us stuck.
Yep.
Um, so that's where I start with most people, is like we start with the symptom, but usually the symptom is rooted in like a deeper belief about themselves,
Right.
which is rooted into some sort of trauma, whether it be like big T or little T trauma.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So some people may have like that more awareness of, okay, like I've been feeling like there's this misalignment in how I've been
Mhm,
acting in my values. I want to go work
mhm,
on this. Whereas other people, it's more hidden and sneaky of like, and like you said, when you ask the question, they're able to identify it, but it might not always be at the forefront of their brain. But it doesn't mean
mhm,
that's not impacting how we feel, how we act, how we interpret other people's messages. And so by having that space, they're to be like, oh, that's what that means. And I
mhm.
love that you describe the distinction between guilt and shame. It's something I work a lot with too. And I'm a big fan of self-compassion work where it's
Yeah,
like, we're
yeah.
all human. We're gonna make
Mhm,
mistakes sometimes. Okay, let's own up to it. Let's learn from it. Let's move forward
mhm.
versus, oh, I'm this crappy person. I don't deserve these good things. I should have known that. And we start like getting deeper and deeper in that hole. And it's like, well, it's not really a helpful, fun place to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and mistakes are part of learning, right? Which then is part of grit. So, like, I mean, if we don't make mistakes, we can't learn and we can't get
Hmm.
better.
Hmm.
Um, but that's hard. I mean, I recognize that clients come in and we're asking them to like dismantle a belief system that may have been installed in childhood, right?
Yeah.
So I don't expect them to do that quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but it's amazing how much quicker it is once I started getting into more of like the EMDR world.
Hmm.
Seems faster for those clients. Not always,
Hmm.
but typically. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, I think like we are not here to shame people for having these thoughts. Like, even if it's like, oh my gosh, yes, I notice I do that. Of course you do. Like, it's a
Mhm,
coping skill, it's a defense
mhm.
mechanism, it's a way that our brain has learned to make sense of the world and to help us survive and to prevent us from getting hurt. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay to do these things. And my favorite word today,
Mhm.
it's not always sustainable or makes us feel good. And so there's ways like
Yeah.
EMDR, therapy, identifying
Mhm,
these things where we can
mhm.
find a more balance there. This isn't
Yeah.
even one of the questions I have. We brought it up a little bit.
Yeah.
EMDR, how does
Yeah.
that like just how do you incorporate that into your work with folks? I know that's becoming like one of your big goals, and you've really,
Yeah.
really integrating with folks lately.
Yeah. I got trained in during the pandemic, I think 2021. Don't quote me on that. And then went through all that process, used it very sparingly because I was doing crisis work at the time and
Mm,
it just didn't come up. And then I started my practice part-time
yeah.
in the evenings and used it a little more. And I was like, okay, I kind of see the benefits. It wasn't until I think I started full-time in private practice that I was like, okay, I really do see the benefits for a lot of my clients and um the relief, right? Like
Mm,
that's what people come here for.
mhm,
They already kind of know something's wrong most of the time,
mhm.
unless they're being forced into therapy by a spouse or by a boss or whatever.
Right.
But like if they're seeking you out, they know something's wrong and they want to feel
Mhm,
different. And
mhm.
I think EMDR helps people achieve that maybe in a faster way.
Yeah.
Um, I use it not with every client because not every client likes it or enjoys it. I do have a lot of clients that it takes a little bit of convincing, and so we do a little bit of resourcing just to
Hmm.
give them an idea of what it feels like.
Yeah.
I'm also pretty creative. Like I think you can do like walk and talk and do EMDR.
Mm.
Walking is bilateral stimulation. I think you can do. I have one client who cannot sit still. They have like an ADHD type presentation, and so they toss a like a stress ball back
I
and forth
love
for their
that.
bilateral stimulation, and then their eyes follow it, and that's enough for them. Yeah, so it's been wonderful. I'm pursuing certification. I'll be done pretty soon, I think in October.
Yay.
Yeah, and I'm excited about that. It's been great to see
Yeah.
how how quickly it helps people move through things that talk therapy may not have moved as quickly. And I
Mhm.
am always quick to tell people like talk therapy does work, right?
Mhm.
Like we're not saying it doesn't work. It just may take longer to
Mhm.
get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I've had a client that I was like seeing for a couple of years, and they were like kicking butt. I mean, they were doing everything, so motivated, using all the
Mm-hmm.
tools, and there were just certain aspects of their body that like was just protecting them so much that they weren't able to like fully integrate all the material. And we did a couple
Yeah.
EMDR, and they're just like, that seems like voodoo. And I'm like, I know it's, and then
Yeah.
like I'm always like, I know it seems weird, like I fully
Yeah.
disclose, it seems a
Mm-hmm.
little woo-woo.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite word today, and it works for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It works. It works. I've been using the flash technique lately, and I feel like it has brought a lot of relief to clients. And that has been cool to see. My consultant uses a lot of like ego states type.
Mm,
He always says like IFS. He was like, IFS feels clunky to me. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I was trained in IFS, but I get it. Like there are a lot of pieces to that.
mm-hmm,
But ego states work as parts work too. It's just a
mm-hmm,
different way of looking at it. And I found actually that's been helpful too, like helping
mm,
clients look at a memory of themselves as a child or a young adult or whatever and be like, what does that version of you need from you right
mm,
now?
mm-hmm.
And they'll be like, sometimes they can't tell you, but a lot of times they can. They'll be like, they just needed to be told they were a good kid and they
Mm,
didn't deserve to be treated that way. And I'm
yeah.
like, are you willing to do that? And they're like, yeah, I think, okay, go enter the memory
Mm,
and do that for them now.
mm-hmm.
And that has been cool to see. Like
Yeah.
it's amazing to watch people do that in
That's so
session.
cool. Being able to like, so what I'm really hearing you say, just like individualizing it for people of
Mm-hmm.
like, if you want to, move your body a little bit more, there's ways
Yeah,
you can incorporate that. If you want
yeah.
maybe a little bit more structure, you can, set some things up. If you want to integrate some IFS or ego or these other cool
Mm-hmm.
models, like you're really doing what is best for the folks that are sitting in your office.
Yeah, I try. It's not and it is trial and error. There are people
Mhm.
who've done an EMDR session and come back and been like, okay, it feels like it opened up a big giant
Mm,
box that I didn't know. I'm like, sometimes that happens. Like
mm-hmm.
that's we pack the metaphor of like, your brain has like a secretary up there and she's not a very good filer. Okay. She puts things in files. They don't always make sense why they're all in the same file. It's okay. We're
Yeah.
we're gonna make it through.
I love it. I use the filing cabinet. I think I'm
Yeah.
going to steal the secretary
Yeah.
though.
I'm
Like
like,
we're just, she's
she's very,
tired.
yeah, she's tired. She hasn't had enough caffeine.
She's close to retirement.
She's,
Like
yeah,
girl just
she's
wants to
checked
go
out.
home.
Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah. She so is though. Like, because clients will be like, I don't know why those memories are in the same cluster.
Yes.
They just
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. And like you said, like normalizing that of like, I think that's a big fear that a lot of people have of just like therapy in general, let
Mm-hmm.
alone, EMDR. Like, I don't like it's been tucked away in the box, it's in the storage unit. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to open that up and like Pandora's box gets unleashed. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that can happen, but for a lot of times, you don't start with ripping off the box right away. Like, so much of the
Yeah.
work is we're working on resources and
Mm-hmm.
tools and creating you like this toolkit so you can feel
Mm-hmm.
prepared for if something sneaks out of that box, we can learn to put it back in the box. We can,
Yes.
keep it closed. We can
Yes.
tolerate things. So it's like very rarely are you going to be like bombarded with things
Yeah.
initially. And I hope most people aren't, but I mean, even just going to therapy can be
Mm-hmm.
stressful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a stressful process. I think that's where we kind of reiterate to people like, I think therapy and therapeutic work, really any healing work, is going to be a source of positive stress, which is good for the body,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we want positive sources of stress. That's how we build muscles, so to speak. But too much negative stress, which is what a lot of our clients come to us
Mm-hmm.
with, is what damages the body. So it's okay to feel stressed in here because we're doing good stress,
Yeah.
positive stress. Yeah.
Yep. It's in a safe space. You got a team
Mm-hmm.
of folks. So,
Yeah.
as you were talking, that reminds me of the quote that's on your website. So I do some
Mm.
digging when I chat with
Yeah,
folks.
absolutely.
And I loved that there's a quote on your website that says the purpose of psychotherapy is to set people free by
Mm.
I have awful handwriting, so I don't know
Yeah.
who it's by, but it's
Yeah.
on your website if they want to
Yeah.
cite it. That
Yes.
stood out to me. And it's just again like very like epitome of the work that you do. Why did that quote stand out to you?
Yeah. So it's a quote by Rollo May, who I had never heard of. Social work programs are very broad and generalist, just because of, I think they're preparing you for lots of different roles. Social workers can do a lot of different
Fair.
things. It's not like a marriage and family therapy graduate course of study where you're really focused on techniques or pioneers in the field. The quote though, gosh, I love it. I read it and I thought, oh, that's how I feel about therapy. And I liked it because it's open-ended. It's like you read it and you go, the purpose of psychotherapy is to set people free. And it's like, from what? And then clients can really fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Like it could be freedom from anything. I mean, mostly shame, right?
Yeah.
But also like more tangible forms of freedom. It could be freedom like leaving a bad marriage, or exiting a toxic work environment, or finding new friends that support you, or working through religious, trauma. Like it can be freedom from whatever the client wants.
Yeah. It is
Really.
really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know when I was reading it, maybe this says a lot about me and maybe the things that I need to work out in therapy. It's just like to set people free of just like we have all these things, trapped in us or we're stuck. And it's just like you said, people want relief. We want freedom from these patterns and cycles that we get stuck in. And like I said, whatever it is, that's up to the client to be able to be like, oh, like I can achieve this. I can do this. Freedom is possible.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and clients don't always know at the beginning of our work together that they're going to end up leaving their job, or, like I don't tell people that. I don't get my crystal ball out and be like, here's what I think will happen. But as people get better, they tolerate less, less discomfort. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not that they tolerate less discomfort. It's that they're better able to tolerate discomfort and determine what types they want to put up with. Right. So when clients come in, I have a colleague next door who, she's a marriage and family therapist, been doing it like 25 years. And she said, I oftentimes warn people that individual therapy is tough on marriages. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting perspective that I hadn't considered prepping people for. She was like, yeah, but we're talking about one partner is changing significantly, and maybe the other one is too, but not at the same rate. And she was like, so I always prep people that setting yourself free from stuff could be really, really hard too.
Definitely.
Doesn't mean that relationship won't survive or whatever, but just prepping people, scaffolding almost for people like, hey, this could jar some relationships, some stuff in your life loose.
Yeah. What a systems thinker. Because I'm like, well, like that makes total sense, right? If you're changing one thing in a system, there's going to be these ripple effects. And sometimes they're good ripple effects and they're helpful, and you can model things and relationships, or these dynamics can improve. Other times it might be like, oh, like I'm growing over here and learning different tools, or maybe my worth is changing, or I'm able to be more assertive with my needs, and not blaming that other person, but they may be on a different path. And it's like, oh, well, the patterns that were working are no longer working anymore.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like I'm doing boundary work with a lot of clients too, and kind of from Nija to Wab, like her work, and clients will be like, but it feels restrictive. I'm like, but boundaries actually set us free in the long run. Like they give us and the person that we're in relationship with something to bounce off of, to understand about each other. And if a relationship is healthy enough, it can survive the work that we do in here.
Oh, boundaries. That's a whole other chat. I love boundaries.
Yeah. I was like, we better not open that box or we'll be here all day.
Like I got a client in 30 minutes, so that's a whole other conversation. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask is, you have been in the field for 10 years. I mean, you've worked in agency work, you've done private practice, you've worked with a variety of presenting goals and just clients. How do you stay resilient and connected to your grit?
This question threw me because I read it last night. I read the email, 2 weeks ago, and was like, yeah, I need to do those. And then last night at 10:30 was like, I better look at those one more time and at least think about them. I think I got disconnected from resilience and grit through the course of agency work. I worked in a halfway house for a little bit, graduate
Yeah.
school, and then a little bit out of graduate school, and then did kind of I'd call it like a community-based, home-based therapy agency, and then moved into like community mental health, and stayed there for a good portion of my career and did crisis work for several years. And I remember leaving and thinking, I don't really recognize myself. Not in a terrible way, not in like I feel like I've completely changed, but just like I'm not the healthiest version of me. And so that's really what this last year has been about. Because I've been in full-time private practice now for a year and a couple of weeks. Yeah. And it's been reconnecting to what helps me stay resilient and gritty. And it's things like taking good care of my body. It's things like eating well. It's things like having routines and structure. It's going to therapy for myself and working through stuff on my own time. And a lot of that falls to the wayside. I mean, community mental health doesn't encourage that. Not, I don't even know that it's intentional. I just think that there's so many other problems.
Yeah.
At least not at the agency I was at. I can't speak for every community mental health agency, but you look around and you were like, we're trying to tout healthy living to clients, and we aren't healthy either.
No, I can so relate. I mean, everyone's, experiences are different, but I mean, I try to be very open with my burnout experiences. I almost left the field because I was like, internalized it. I was like, I'm not cut out for this. I don't know how people do this. I'm too young for this. I can't do this for another 30 plus years. And I agree. I don't think that the agencies that I worked at were inherently bad. They were in these other systems that they were stuck in their own patterns. And I lost myself, I was not the nicest person, my favorite version of me. And I agree. Basically, a lot of things you did of it's basic stuff. Like, and it sounds so silly because it's what I tell my clients, like in those first few sessions, I'm like, I know you're expecting me to do some like wild magical stuff. I'm like, how much sleep did you get last night? Are you drinking water? Like, what are we eating? And it's just connecting to those things helps us be resilient and that connected to grit.
Yes. Yeah. And I think clients want us to have a magic wand. I wish I did. But I would be on a beach somewhere. I'd be a bajillionaire, right? Like totally would market that wand and sell it to every therapist I know. But it is the basic stuff. Like, what am I doing to show up for myself every single day? I mean, it's consistency. Like, that has been a hard thing. Like, I was like, I made a goal probably a year and a half ago of like, I'm gonna first it was I'm gonna walk every day. Well, that's hard to do in Oklahoma. We have really weird weather, but like I eventually changed it to like, I'm gonna move my body every day. And then I had to find myself shifting from an all or nothing thinking, because I used to be like, well, if it's not 30 minutes, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's better than 0 minutes? 15. So maybe you go do 15 minutes of movement.
Yeah.
Better than 0. But that stuff doesn't happen in like, I lovingly refer to community mental health as like a churn and burn model, right? Like they churn both clients and therapists, and they burn both of them out. More so the therapists and the helpers in those institutions. But the churn and burn model doesn't have room for, oh, I'm going to go take a 15-minute walk at lunch. You can't do that, because guess what? A crisis walked in.
Yep. And we need to bill as much as we can, because in order to stay afloat and to do the work that we need to do, we need money, because we're nonprofits. And so it's just like all these things. And we don't have time to take a half day, because guess what? I have all this paperwork I have to do. And if paperwork doesn't get done, then we can't bill it. And we're going to get audited, and then we're going to get, it's just a never ending mess.
Yes. Yeah. And then we could get really spicy and be like, it's about money, but it's also about people at the top and management getting 5 and 6 figure bonuses. Why is a nonprofit boss making a 6-figure bonus?
Yep. I saw that
it's a little spicy. I don't want to like, it's just always been a question for me. Like, why are we doing that? Why is that the focus?
Just be curious about it. Again, that might be a different conversation, but at the core of the places aren't bad. Individual stinkers might be adding fuel to that fire, though.
Yeah. And there's a lot of really talented clinicians in community mental health. Like some of the most talented therapists I know, they just get burned out and then they don't even make it to private practice or
Mm-hmm.
well-being.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Because I mean, like if you think about it, I mean, it's any job, right? Like I'm thinking of anyone
Mm-hmm.
who's burned out. It takes effort to
Mm-hmm.
apply for jobs, interview, figure out what we want, think that we even deserve something else. Think that even a
Yeah.
different place can like have hope and be different. Like we're not always in those headspaces. And so we're
Mm-hmm.
just like, well, almost easier sometimes to just stay in the chaos that we know.
Yeah. 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 And I think people are scared of the unknown. So like
Mhm.
if you leave, it is unknown a little bit. I mean, the first couple of months of I actually would now correct that to say the first 8 to 12 months of private practice full time, you're figuring it out. And
Mhm.
it's okay to not know. And it's also okay to admit you've made mistakes and wish you could have shifted things quicker or,
Yeah.
you know, so that piece is hard for people. And I get it. Like leaving anything is hard.
Oh yeah. Yep. And just
Mhm,
know it's all the uncertainty. Our brains like to know and prepare for
mhm.
things. Oh.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time. I want to be
Yeah.
respectful of your schedule. And so the question
Mhm.
that I always end with folks is how have you been practicing authenticity lately?
Yeah, I joked at the beginning and said like I felt nervous, which is funny. I don't feel nervous now, but like I
Yay.
think speaking things like that is how I show up very much so in the therapy room in the same way, like
Mm-hmm.
almost kind of a Gestaltian type feel of like really radical genuineness of,
Mm-hmm.
hey, how'd that land for you? Because like I said it and then I was like, oh, how'd that sound? So I tend to be that way in the therapy room, but in my
Mm.
personal life, I try really hard to show up consistently the same to all the people in my life.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I do it perfectly. And then authentically apologizing when I
Mm-hmm.
miss the mark, like in
Mm-hmm.
parenting or in marriage or in friendships, being like, okay, I messed up. I know I
Mm-hmm.
messed up. I'm really sorry about that. What can I do to make that better? So I
Yeah.
don't know if that answers the question, but showing up
Thanks.
the same
Mm-hmm.
everywhere if I
Yeah.
can.
No, I
Mhm.
like all of that. And yeah, I'm with you on the like, I'm not I don't have therapy face that they call it.
Mm-mm.
I'm like, I'm
No.
gonna have a reaction. I think we even talked about that in one of our like
Hmm.
Okie networking
Hmm.
things of like,
Yeah.
not saying I'm gonna make it about me, but like I'm gonna show up. Like I'm gonna have some
Hmm.
emotion. And it sounds like, you're real with your clients on that. Of like, this sounded better
Hmm.
in my head. How did you take that? And
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
makes you
That moment of like,
relatable.
oh, or I'll say something and be like, oh, let me rewind. We're gonna
Yeah.
let me rewind that and I'm gonna re-say it. And sometimes clients are like, no, I liked that was fine the way you said
Oh,
it. And I'm like, oh, okay, good.
great. I glad it
I'm
worked
glad
for
it
you.
really glad it worked for you. Don't
But
write
I
that
think
down.
it makes you
Uh
real and like they can feel safe then to be like,
yeah.
oh, actually like that wasn't like, thank you for saying
Hmm.
that. 'Cause, like that didn't land or like it made me feel this certain way. And they can then
Hmm.
be their honest and authentic selves
Yes.
with you, which is crucial for therapy. And then in
Yeah.
the personal world, it sounds like you show up in a similar way of like being consistent, owning if you like say something that might be off or you because you're
Hmm.
human, you're gonna make a mistake sometimes.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
like we kind of talked about in the beginning, you own it. You apologize, take
Hmm.
accountability, and just kind of like try to make amends in that way.
Hmm. Yeah. I almost wonder if that's another piece of grit that's just not
Mm,
studied, right? Is being able to be accountable.
yeah. Well, there we go.
Hmm.
Whatever the researcher was that you said in the beginning, that can
Yeah,
be
I'll send it to Angela because I can't. I'm busy, so she can
like
study that
you're
part.
on a first name basis. Like
Yeah,
Angela,
no.
here's this.
She'd probably laugh and be like, "Oh, there's a therapy practice named about that. That's so cool." But she wouldn't.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. So she has a TED talk on it, which is interesting
Oh,
too.
I'm gonna watch
Hmm.
that. Yeah, I didn't know there's like I've heard of this term. I love
Hmm.
the meaning now that I actually like, learned what it was and not just like
Hmm.
my own assumption. There's
Hmm.
research and like it makes sense. I'm like, yeah, that checks out
Hmm.
for my brain.
Yeah, yeah. So, anyways, but
That's
yeah,
exciting. Well, thank you so
yeah.
much for joining. I had so
Oh,
much fun chatting with
yeah,
you.
yeah,
I got to learn a lot, and hopefully, some other people can
yeah,
feel get some new resources or have
yeah,
some different ways of thinking. So, thank you so
yeah.
much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Ah, this was
Yeah.
so fun. Well, folks, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. And remember, the world needs the real you. So let's explore that authenticity together.